Ethan Crow had shut down a stretch of railroad years ago, and with it, most of his life. He lived alone beside a maintenance station no one visited anymore, where even the trains had learned to stay away. Then one night, the red signal came back on, a warning that shouldn't exist. When he stepped into the sand, he found a woman barely standing, clutching a torn bag like it was the last thing she owned. She looked at him and said, "Please, don't call anyone. If this moment already has you thinking, stay with the story. And if it speaks to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this." Ethan didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where she came from. He didn't ask what she was running from. He unlocked the old maintenance shed with a key he hadn't used in years. The door complained as it opened, metal grinding against metal, the sound sharp in the quiet desert night. Inside, it smelled like dust, oil, and time left alone. He lit a small oil heater, the flame catching slow, steady, not warm, yet, just alive. He set a jug of water on the workbench, a clean cup beside it. He laid an old cot flat, checked that it didn't wobble. Then he took off his reflective jacket and held it out, arm's length. No sudden moves. She watched everything. The way he turned his back when she changed, the way he stepped aside instead of closer, the way he spoke only when it was necessary. And even then, barely above the wind pushing against the walls. She didn't thank him. She didn't relax. Her eyes tracked every sound, the heater clicking, sand brushing the tin roof, a loose bolt rattling somewhere in the dark. Ethan locked the door from the inside, not to trap her, to make sure no one else could come in. Then he shut off the overhead light, leaving just a single lamp glowing low in the corner. Enough to see, not enough to feel exposed. This wasn't comfort. It was something smaller, something more careful. Safety, sometimes, isn't a promise. It's the absence of questions. No one asked her to explain herself. No one asked her to prove she deserved to stay. No one asked her to relive anything to earn a place on that cot. She sat with her back to the wall, jacket pulled tight, listening, waiting for the catch, waiting for the moment kindness turned into something else. But it didn't. Ethan stayed near the door, cleaning his hands with a rag that was already stained beyond saving. He kept his distance, like there were lines on the floor only he could see, and he refused to cross them. Outside, the desert kept breathing, slow, indifferent. Inside, for the first time in a long while, someone was allowed to exist without being examined. It wasn't peace, but it was enough air to breathe. She didn't tell her story all at once. It came out in pieces, like something fragile she didn't trust the light with. Seasonal work, cash paid late, promises that shifted every time she tried to hold on to them. They took her papers first, said it was temporary, said it was for processing. Then came the fees, transportation, housing, food she didn't ask for but was charged anyway. Numbers written down, crossed out, rewritten, always growing, never clear. She didn't talk much about being hurt. She talked about signatures, a clipboard slid across a table, a pen placed just close enough to feel polite, pages filled with words she didn't understand, but was told she'd already agreed to. "They do everything with paper," she said quietly. "That way. No one has to raise their voice." Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't nod. He just stood there, hands resting on the edge of the workbench, like he was bracing for something heavy. He'd spent years on the railroad. He knew that tone. The one people used when they were about to make something wrong, sound reasonable. There was a sound outside, tires on gravel, slow. deliberate. A company vehicle rolled past the station. Didn't stop. Didn't speed up either. Just slowed long enough to be seen. Then it was gone. Mara noticed it too. Her shoulders tightened. Not fear. Calculation. That's how it works, she said. They don't chase you. They document you. If she ran, they'd file a report. If she stayed, they'd call her an intruder. Either way, the paper would say she was the problem. No bruises needed. No threats spoken out loud. Just a process. Ethan stared at the door long after the engine noise faded. He knew what happened next. He'd seen it before, dressed up in clean language and stamped approvals. How a person could disappear without anyone technically doing anything wrong. This wasn't about fists or knives. This was about erasure. A life reduced to a line item. A signature that turned a human being into a mistake that needed correcting. Mara picked at the edge of her bag. Eyes down. They don't have to hurt you, she said. They just have to make it impossible for you to exist. Ethan finally spoke. His voice was low. That kind of danger doesn't leave marks, he said. She looked up at him then. Really looked, and for the first time, he saw it land. The threat wasn't what they would do to her body. It was what they could do to her name. And once that was gone, no one would even know what to look for. They didn't come running. They didn't shout. They arrived the way people do when they believe the law is already on their side. 3 of them stepped out of a clean vehicle. Shoes untouched by sand. Shirts pressed like they'd planned this meeting. One smiled first. Another checked a clipboard. The third stayed quiet, eyes moving, counting exits. They called her name, not loudly, not cruelly, just precise. Mara stiffened before Ethan did. The man with the clipboard held out a thin stack of papers. He didn't cross the threshold. He didn't need to. This is a voluntary acknowledgement, he said. Confirms she understands she's currently on private property and agrees to vacate. Voluntary acknowledgement. Agrees. Words polished smooth enough to cut without blood. Ethan stepped forward and stopped in the doorway. Not aggressive. Just present. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask them to leave. He asked one question. Simple. Even polite. Who owns the rail line past this station? The smile didn't drop. It tightened. That information is on file, the man said. Everything here is. Mara watched their faces as if she'd seen this scene before. Because she had. Different place. Same tone. Same calm certainty that whatever happened next wouldn't be their fault. One of them shifted his weight. Casual. Calculated. Like they were trying to remember whether this counted as patience or delay. If you make this difficult, the man said gently, we'll have to document an unauthorized occupant. That creates complications. For everyone. He didn't look at Mara when he said it. He looked at Ethan. That was the trap. Get angry, and you become the problem. Argue, and you give them something to write down. Ethan didn't take the bait. He nodded once, like he was filing the words away, like he'd heard them clearly. They left the papers on the bench just inside the door, close enough to claim they'd delivered them, far enough to say they never entered. Then they walked back to their vehicle, unhurried, certain. The engine faded into the desert. For a long moment, no one spoke. Mara broke the silence first. Her voice was low, flat. Don't do anything stupid. Ethan didn't answer right away. He stared at the papers like they were something alive, something waiting. He folded them once, slowly, put them down. And in that quiet, it became clear he wasn't deciding whether to act. He was deciding how much he was willing to lose. The night after they came with their papers, the rail woke up, not with a whistle, not with voices. With a vibration Ethan felt through the soles of his boots. The line was supposed to be dead, tagged, logged, left alone. But the signal panel flickered, just once, then again. A test run. Someone had reactivated the stretch that curved past the wash, the one everyone in the company knew was unstable. The one that buckled in heat. The one that, if something went wrong, would need a name to blame. And Mara was already living in the margins of that name. Ethan didn't wake her. He pulled on his old work jacket, the reflective stripes dulled by years of dust. He stepped into the wind and followed the hum until the rails began to sing. You don't hear a freight train first. You feel it. A pressure in the chest. A low, patient force that doesn't care who's in the way. Ethan climbed the signal ladder with hands that remembered the work better than his mind did. He flipped the manual override. The red light bloomed against the dark like a wound you couldn't ignore. Then he pulled the emergency horn. Once. Twice. Miles out. Steel screamed as brakes answered. The train slowed. Not fast enough to feel safe, but enough to mean someone had noticed. By the time the engine settled into an angry idle, headlights cutting through sand, the trucks arrived. Company trucks. Clean. Quiet. Legal. They didn't shout. They didn't run. They walked up like men who knew the paperwork would win. "What do you think you're doing?" one of them asked. Calm as a ledger. Ethan stayed by the signal box. "You're running a test over compromised track. That's not your call. It is if someone dies." They looked past him, toward the warehouse, toward the dark. "You're harboring an illegal resident." Another said, "That makes this sabotage." Ethan shook his head once. "This section can't hold a load at night. The metal contracts. You know that." A pause. Then the coldest voice spoke. That was when they said it. "You really want to talk about people getting killed on your watch?" The wind picked up. The words landed harder than any fist could have. From the doorway. Mara stepped into the light. She didn't hide this time. She looked at Ethan. Really looked. And asked the question she hadn't asked before. "What did you do?" He didn't answer right away. Because sometimes doing the right thing means standing still, while everything you buried starts breathing again. Ethan turned back to the men. "The train doesn't move," he said. "Not tonight. And if we force it, then you'll do it knowing." Silence. They could push him aside. They could write him up. They could make this ugly and expensive and permanent. And that was the point. Doing the right thing doesn't always mean winning. Sometimes it just means stepping into the light first, so no one else has to take the fall. Behind him, the red signal burned steady. Waiting. The documents didn't arrive with noise. They came in a thin envelope, dropped on the bench like an afterthought. Old letterhead, old signatures, the kind of paper that smells faintly of dust and certainty. Ethan knew what they were before he opened them. Years ago, he'd signed off on a stretch of rail that never should have gone live. Heat stress, fault lines, warnings buried under deadlines. He'd told himself it was temporary, that they'd fix it later, that no one would get hurt in the meantime. Someone did. The file didn't use words like death. It used dates, incident codes, closed investigations. One name stood out. Mara's. Not hers. Her brother's. The room went quiet in a way that had weight to it. Mara read everything without sitting down, without blinking. Each page seemed to take something out of her. Slowly, like heat leaving metal. When she finally looked up, there was no anger in her face. That was worse. "So," she said, calm enough to hurt. You didn't stand in front of that train for me. Ethan didn't interrupt. You stood there for yourself. It wasn't an accusation. It was a conclusion. He waited for the instinct he'd practiced his whole life, the one that explained, justified, softened. It didn't come. I ran, he said instead. One sentence, no decoration. I signed, I walked away, and I lived with it. Mara nodded, like that confirmed something she'd already suspected. You don't get credit for stopping it this time, she said. Not from me. I know. The words sat between them, heavy but clean. He didn't ask her to understand, didn't ask her to forgive, didn't even ask her to stay. That was the difference. There's a kind of silence that avoids responsibility, and there's another kind that accepts it. Ethan stayed quiet because anything else would have been another theft, another attempt to take relief where he hadn't earned it. I'm turning myself in, he said after a moment. They'll reopen the case. I'll lose what's left of my work. Maybe more. Mara's jaw tightened, not in pity, in recognition. You could leave, she said. You could disappear again. I already did that once. Outside, the red signal light cut through the dark. Steady. Unapologetic. This was the part stories usually rush through. The part where a confession fixes something. Where the truth sets everyone free. But truth doesn't work like that. Some wrongs don't get balanced. Some damage doesn't shrink just because someone finally admits it. Real accountability doesn't come with relief. It comes with weight. Ethan didn't get lighter standing there. He got heavier. And he accepted it. That was the quiet he chose. Not the silence of hiding. The silence of staying put while the cost arrived. Mara turned away first. Not because she was done. Because she needed distance to keep breathing. Behind her, Ethan remained where he was. No gestures, no last words. Just a man standing in the open, knowing he might be misunderstood forever and doing the right thing anyway. Because real atonement isn't about being seen clearly. It's about acting clearly, even when the story ends with you still in the dark. Mara didn't leave, but she didn't soften either. The first thing she asked for was simple. Her bag. Ethan handed it over without comment. No hesitation, no reminder. Just placed it where she could reach it and stepped back. When she asked to lock the door herself at night, he gave her the key. When she didn't answer a question, he didn't circle back. They settled into a rhythm that felt more like work than healing. Water in the morning. Food left on the counter, not offered hand to hand. Locks checked. Lights tested. Nothing flickering. Nothing sudden. Ethan moved through the days the way he used to move through rail yards. Methodical. Predictable. If something had to change, he said it first. If a noise was coming, he warned her. He didn't try to make things better. He tried to make them steady. Some days, Mara slept. Really slept. Other days, the sound of metal shifting in the heat sent her upright. Breath sharp. Eyes scanning corners that held nothing. There were nights she didn't sleep at all. Ethan never asked why. He kept the space clean. Not spotless, just clear. No clutter. No surprises. The lamp stayed at the same brightness every night. The heater clicked the same way every time it cooled. The world stayed small on purpose. Healing didn't arrive like a breakthrough. It showed up as a cup of coffee she finished. A door she closed without flinching. A morning where she didn't sit with her back to the wall. Then it disappeared again. There were setbacks. Long silences. Days where she barely moved. Days where her voice came out sharp over nothing. And she left the room before the echo faded. Ethan didn't correct her, didn't soothe her, didn't turn it into a moment. He understood something most people missed. Recovery isn't a straight line. It's a series of small permissions. Permission to rest, permission to pull back, permission to have a bad day without it becoming a failure. He didn't measure progress, he measured safety. And safety, in that place, didn't mean comfort. It meant no one asking her to perform strength, no one asking her to explain pain, no one turning her survival into a lesson. Some nights, they sat in the same room without speaking, not together, just not alone. The desert pressed in from all sides, vast and indifferent. But inside the walls stayed where they were. That was the work. Not fixing, not saving. Just holding the conditions steady enough for someone else to decide who they wanted to be next. There's a kind of care that looks like distance, and a kind of love that refuses to make a story out of someone else's wounds. This was that kind. Quiet, uneven, and real enough to last. Mara didn't raise her voice when she said it. She didn't soften it either. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you." Ethan nodded. Once. Like that answer made sense. He didn't reach for words that asked for mercy. Didn't explain himself again. Didn't treat forgiveness like a finish line he was entitled to cross. He turned in the reports, opened the old files, let the investigation move forward, knowing exactly what it would cost him. What was left of his work. What was left of his name. Out by the tracks, the red signal burned against the dark, steady, unapologetic. Mara stood there for a long moment, watching it. Then she said, almost to herself, "At least this time, someone stopped it." Ethan didn't argue with that. He didn't claim credit. "You don't owe me anything," he said, and he meant it. There's a story people like to tell about healing. That forgiveness is the proof it worked. That if you don't forgive, you're stuck. But that's not how it goes for everyone. Sometimes healing means distance. Sometimes it means holding your ground. Sometimes it means being allowed to say, reminding yourself included, that what happened mattered too much to be smoothed over. Forgiveness isn't a duty, it's a choice, and no one gets to demand it from the person who paid the price. Ethan stayed where he was, carrying what was his to carry. Mara kept her space because she was allowed to. The weight ended up exactly where it belonged, not on the wounded, but on the one who had something to answer for. There's a moment most of us recognize, even if we don't like admitting it. A moment when someone is sinking, but they don't shout, they don't wave, they just slow down and disappear a little. And that's usually when we tell ourselves a story, that it's not our place, that we don't know enough, that stepping in might make things worse, so we keep walking. But sometimes, the kindest thing isn't pulling someone out of the water. It's stopping long enough for them to realize they're not alone. Not fixing, not saving, just staying. So here's the question this story leaves you with. If tomorrow you see a red light in the middle of your own desert, something that would be easier to ignore, do you shut it off and move on, or do you stop, knowing you might be questioned, misunderstood, or blamed for it? If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need it. And if you want more stories like this, take a second to like the video and subscribe.